A number of years ago, I heard this expression, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. I didn't know where it came from. I looked it up. It came from computer coding. But I thought to myself, gee, if I had known this in the early 70s, I could have explained so much better what seemed to be just going off the rails in the childbirth conversation. And that off the rails actually started at my first birth and the experiences of so many of the families that I worked with in the early 70s. So I want to give you 5 examples of garbage in, garbage out within the childbirth conversation, and also talk to you about solutions that the families that I worked with started to put into place very early in the 1970s, then in the 1980s. So you're going to find other examples of this. And what's really important are 2 things. To understand that the reason we are where we are is because we did what we did. But we did what we did because the ideas and the words and the actions led us to do those things. And as Maya Angelou said, we did what we did because we knew how to do it, and when we know better, we do better. We have to look at GIGO not as failures of systems, but as gaps that become obvious, and then we have the ability to fill those gaps. So the first thing I noticed had to do with Lamaze breathing, and to some degree with Bradley breathing. Lamaze was taught in probably almost every hospital in the United States from the 50s to the mid-70s. And our generation, post-World War II generation, we all went to the classes. Women had demanded that husbands come into births, and fathers now were being taught birth coaching skills. That was not GIGO. That was not garbage in, garbage out. That was solutions. That was filling the gaps. Women didn't want to be left alone. We wanted our husbands with us. Our husbands wanted to know what to do, and so they were taught some skills. The Lamaze breathing was in and out your mouth very quickly. And where this garbage in was that it was unsustainable. You couldn't do it for a long period of time. You got hyperventilated. And every hospital provided you with a brown paper bag to then breathe into, which didn't make it any better. Bradley was also being taught, but that was taught to sort of a different group of people, more invested in natural birth and also home births in the US. And that breathing was in the nose and out the mouth. And that seemed like a good idea. The Lamaze was unsustainable, but the Bradley in the nose and the out the mouth seemed sustainable if it was done in these 2 manners. Or, however, as humans, in the nose and out the mouth, we use it in different variations. When we're exercising, even when we're being intimate, we can groan doing that. Oh, and we can scream. Ah! So where the garbage in occurred was that fathers heard breathe in the nose and out the mouth, and they accepted all of the variations of that, thinking, well, she's doing it right. She's breathing in her nose and out her mouth. And when women are moaning or screaming, they don't understand why their husband isn't helping them use breathing in the nose and out the mouth to stay in control. So that becomes garbage in and garbage out. So how do you solve this problem? First off, you have to have an idea. So the idea from Birthing Better Families was simply to answer the question, how do humans breathe? And when we asked ourselves that question, we didn't really know the full answer to it. It took us a little bit of time. And when I go around the world and say to people, what are the 4 ways that humans breathe? Whether I talk to us as human beings or talk to human beings who are birth professionals, everybody pauses. Some people come up with fast and slow, that's true, or in the belly or the chest. That's also accurate. But those are only partial functions of the 4 variations that all humans do when they breathe. When I say this, you're going to say, well, I knew that. But what we've discovered is we don't know that. We only know it when we are reminded, which means means that if we really don't know it, if it's not at the top of our brain when we work through the activity of giving birth, then we can't choose the best variation within the 4 patterns. Because if we don't know the 4 patterns, then we're not going to know the variations within them. So the 4 patterns, all humans can breathe in the nose and out the nose. We can breathe in the nose and out the mouth. We can breathe in our mouth and out our nose. And we can breathe in and out our mouth. Each of these patterns have some variation. It is the pattern of in the nose and out the mouth that has the greatest number of variations. As I said, we can do it like this, a slack jaw relaxation, or like this, in which women often count, or we can do it with pleasure, or we can do it with exercise, or we can moan, or we can scream. So when women want to cope, manage, stay on top of, and feel in control while they're doing the activity of birthing their baby, it is best to use the variation of slack jaw or counting, not groaning or screaming. And so fathers then get to fill in the gap by seeing and hearing and helping their partner maintain the variation that can help them relax the best. You can play around with in the nose and out the nose. What are the variations you'd use? Play around with in the mouth and out the nose, or in and out the mouth. Because we can do all those things, they are used at some point in our life. So when we have garbage in and garbage out, which means that Lamaze breathing was not sustainable, and the Bradley breathing could vary so much that we didn't know how to get women back into the variations of in the nose and out the mouth. We didn't know the importance of that. And now you do. Those gaps in that issue can now be filled with understanding the 4 ways that we all breathe, it's all universal, and the variations that help us stay in control when we have an extreme activity. Now, in the nose and out the mouth with slack jaw and counting is not the only variations. Women use in the nose and out the nose as well. So you need to find the ways that you can breathe that can bring you the most relaxation when you are faced with situations that are very challenging. The second time that I recognized that there was garbage in and garbage out, and remember, I didn't know that term back then. I just knew that there was a problem. There were gaps in the conversation so that the ideas, the words, and the actions didn't produce the results. And that's what's important. If we have an idea that breathing can be helpful to us, then we want to have the actions that make it the most helpful for all of us, not just a few of us. In other words, we want breathing skills to be adjustable, adaptable, and sustainable. So this next garbage in, garbage out came from Grantley Dick Reed, which was the fear of birth. Now, Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed were all obstetricians. So they saw a lot of births. And without a doubt, they saw a lot of women cope fine with birth, and women who didn't cope fine with birth. Because they saw birth from the outside, what they basically translated is, gee, women can birth easily, so all women should birth easily. But that's not a correlation. There are lots of reasons why women really struggle with the activity of birth, and that's why Birthing Better Families continued to develop and evolve so many skills to answer the questions of what about or what if. And many of the skills were developed in hindsight, that we just said, if we had had this skill then, it would have changed the situation. That's filling the gap. So let's take a look at fear of birth and why this is garbage in and garbage out. I've been in 30 traditional cultures in my life, and if I hadn't been, I probably wouldn't be able to explain this to you. Every traditional culture in the world is anxious about pregnancy and birth and the newborn period. Rightly so. These are very fragile times in life. For those of us who live in modern countries where there's modern medical care, we do not understand how impactful that has been. I know that there are people who believe that the lifestyle change, being more clean, has made a difference in life, and that may be accurate as well. But without a doubt, it has been modern medicine that has made the biggest impact on the ability to prevent deaths in pregnancy, birth, and in the newborn and up until the age of 5, where 20 to 30% of all children died. So every culture is anxious about birth. They deal with anxiety by becoming observant. And I've done another video on what is called the gift of fear. Instead, Grantley Dick Reed said to women, you shouldn't be afraid. But fear and anxiety are hardwired within us. When we come up to a situation we don't know, then we become anxious and can become fearful. So to tell women, just don't be afraid of birth, means that you're not going to have any pain in birth and that the birth is going to be easy and good, is really garbage in. And what Birthing Better Families decided and how we filled the gaps around that was through skills. And once we developed this broad range of skills, then it was quite easy for us to come up with the way to explain it. You can't change your self-talk in birth. It's there. It's always going to be there. I know that Michelle O'Donnell said, get into your primal brain and just surrender to the experience. Many women aren't comfortable doing that. We really want to do the activity. It's going to happen to us anyway. And most of us would like to feel that we can manage when we're doing a very intense activity. And so having skills permit us to choose what skills we're using on a moment-to-moment basis during the activity of birthing our baby. And it also permits us to recognize that the voice in our head is just chatter. So Birthing Better Families developed the concept that you can have a negative and positive voice. This is how we filled the gap. The negative voice just rapped on and on. Hate it, don't like it, I don't like what they're doing, don't like my blah, 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 blah. But the positive voice says, when I breathe in, I'm going to expand inside my pelvis. When I breathe out, I'm going to soften inside my pelvis. The positive side can say, am I open between my sit bones? Do I feel that the contraction is a progressive contraction with a good peak to it? And we found that the more skilled we became, the more we were able to apply skills and to be observant, even though we felt a high level of anxiety and fear. And this had a huge positive impact once we became a parent. Because, as I say in the video on the gift of fear, newborns can't tell us. They just make sounds and their body moves. So when we become observant and we become anxious, as we observe in our anxiety, we can then begin to ask this question, is what I'm observing looks so horrific that I need to get help or do something right away? And if it is, do that. And if not, keep being observant. And as you observe over a period of time, either you will have to act or do something, or you will find that the situation calms down and you don't need to be as observant and your anxiety goes away. Understanding that fear and anxiety around pregnancy and birth and with our children is hardwired within us. We don't want to try to get rid of it. We want to develop skills so that we can work with it as it's happening. The third example of GIGO was when fathers were told to no longer coach. This occurred in the shift between when I had my first child in 1970 in the US, where there was an entirely skills-based approach to birth through Lamaze and Bradley. Courses were entirely about learning skills because we lacked choices. And the assessments, monitoring procedures that were going to be done to us were going to be done to us. And so we used skills in and around all of the assessments, monitoring procedures. And fathers helped us. They didn't have a great range of skills, but they were there and they were doing their best. And it helped grow the intimacy in our families. And then in the late 1970s, the attitude changed. And the attitude changed changed, that women didn't need skills, cows and cats aren't taught to birth, women don't need to be taught to birth, and that fathers shouldn't tell women what to do, that women should once again be left alone to discover birth by themselves, and that women instinctively know how to birth. In the reality, there's a lot of garbage in all of that. So one side one is just because we do birth does not mean we know how to birth. Pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events, without a doubt. But so is being randy or being hungry. We don't even know what's safe to put in our mouth when we're a baby. We need to be taught. We certainly don't know how to cook instinctively. And most of us don't know how to be good lovers just because we feel like we want to have sex. So we do not know how to birth instinctively. And now, when we add skills to it, we can apply skills as birth unfolds, as it happens to us. And fathers or others that are close to us should be helping us because they're going to be with us and with the baby afterwards. Pregnancy and childbirth is a family event. It's not just a woman's experience. And so people in her family, those close to her, should have skills to help her work through pregnancy and birth and the newborn period and raising a child. And that's what Birthing Better families brought to this conversation. Skills for all of us. And how could we do that effectively? Because we had to realize that 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or another. And we had to realize as humans, we all blink, we all cough, and can tighten up our rectum. And so therefore we can share a set of skills from our two perspectives. Me doing the activity or me helping another person do that activity. So we filled that gap by increasing the number of skills that fathers had and the effectiveness of the skills that fathers had. So when fathers were removed from the role of coaching and told to just support women, this also had a breakdown in family relationships. When men tried to help, women appreciated it. When men just stood around and didn't know how to help, women felt they didn't either want to help, they didn't know how to help, and once the baby was born, women often pushed the man away, saying, "You didn't help me in birth. You're all thumbs. I've got to do this. Get out of my way." And this had a huge impact in the breakdown of families. And so we need to fill in the gap about this and bring fathers back as birth coaches. So the fourth GIGO is choices without skills. So when I first gave birth in 1970, it was all skills, no choices. When I gave birth in 1982, just a short 12 years later, it was all choices and no skills. Birthing Better Families and I had made every effort the best we could in the 70s to say skills and choices should go together. But those advocating for a natural birth were saying that women instinctively know how to birth and that we don't need skills, and that skills weren't achieving their three goals, which was a natural birth, pain-free labor, and one without medical care. You need to remember that many women don't live where they have choices, and women who do live where they have choices, often the choices change. If you ask women, did your birth go as planned? Or if you envisioned the birth you wanted, did you get the birth you wanted? And 99% of women will say the birth wasn't anything like I imagined. So you can't actually choose the birth you want. You can choose some things around the birth, and choices are good, without a doubt, when you have them. However, skills are the bedrock. You need to have skills. It's an activity. It's not a choice. It's an activity, and we have to do the activity. So we've filled in the conversation by continually to advocate for a concept, which is to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills for your birth and use those skills while you do the activity of birthing your baby, whether you have choices or not, and whether your choices change. So that's how we fill in that GIGO. The last GIGO that I want to talk about is the idea that the medical profession has stopped women from having natural births and home births, and that when midwives are in charge, direct entry midwives, non-medically trained midwives, that births will become natural. I immigrated to New Zealand in 1995 without knowing that in 1990 midwives had been given all maternity care, and they chose to work with all families, not just low-risk women. And they hoped by controlling their own profession and being direct entry and advocating for natural birth and home birth and women's choices that they would, over time, decrease the cesarean rate from 12.9% in 1990 down to the World Health Organization of 9%. And they believed for women to have the midwife as a lead maternity carer, even when referred to an obstetrician, that birth would eventually go back to how they imagined birth to be prior to medical care. Well, where's the garbage in? First of all, when they imagine what traditional people did, they don't have it right. It's the only way I can say it. Every traditional culture is full of do's and don'ts in pregnancy, full of them, and in the newborn period. And they believe that pregnancy and childbirth are normal, natural, physiological events, and they interpret that to mean that anything that might happen could happen. So they couple the observation and anxiety with lots of restrictions around pregnancy and birth. However, no culture that I've been in has particular skills for women to use. They all fall under the first childbirth concept, which is there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And that's true to today. So in New Zealand, which has the most amazing maternity model run by midwives, and I've done a video on that as well, what they wanted was not achieved. The cesarean rate is around 28% in 2023. The garbage in is that it really doesn't matter who the care provider is. What matters is whether we have a skilled birthing population. Now I want to go back to Lamaze and Bradley, because I talked about the garbage in and the garbage out, that we can fill the gap with better skills. But I want to tell you that even with the imperfect skills, there was a huge success, and that huge success was pretty much ignored. It was seen by obstetrical nurses and it was seen by obstetricians because multiple millions of us took Lamaze classes for a generation. And that success was that we reduced the global childbirth goal number 2, which was suffering, with imperfect breathing skills, with breathing skills that didn't always adjust, adapt, and weren't sustainable. We still did better than if we hadn't had them. And that's a lesson. Any skill is better than none. And the medical profession aligned with the traditional communities. They believe that anything that might happen could happen. And that's why they use lots of assessments, monitoring procedures. They deal with the childbirth goal number 2, suffering, by giving women pain relief. Now it's epidurals. Can skills reduce the use of pain relief in childbirth? Well, absolutely. Because when you have skills, you don't have to like it. You can hate it, but feel that you're really coping by using your skills. The natural birth movement, however, felt that pregnancy and childbirth, being normal, natural, physiological life events, meant that it was easy and with a good outcome, and that women knew how to do it, and they just needed to be left alone to discover birth by themselves. So this is where we have garbage in and garbage out, and why I'm creating this course for ICPA and the ICPA members in Pathways Magazine and the consumers, and for the rest of you. We need to grow a self-learning, skilled birthing population. The idea of that is 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or another. And the words are just that. If you're pregnant, you're going to give birth. And it's an activity that all pregnant women are going to do with their baby, alone. Even if there are 100 people in the room, nobody else can do it except for you. And the actions are, become skilled. If your partner or other can be with you, they need to learn some birth skills. They need to be able to see and hear when you need help to stay on top of things and cope and manage better. If they're not going to be at the birth, they can help you prepare for birth in the privacy of your own home. That's the wonders of having skills. You have time. The best time is to start from about 24 weeks, when you know pregnancy is more than halfway finished. And you have time to learn some skills and to integrate them into this unknown experience, because you never know what your birth is going to be like. However, when you have skills and you begin to use skills very early as the birth unfolds, either as contractions start, or you think they might be starting, or on the way to the hospital for your cesarean, it's your activity. This is the activity. So use skills. And as the activity advances, use skills more. Just keep using skills. You are doing the activity. and you will birth better when you have skills. So the sixth example of garbage in, garbage out has to do with these words. Pregnancy and childbirth are normal, natural, physiological life events. And I mentioned why, because there are two meanings of it. One is what traditional people and medical people feel. Anything that might happen could happen. So therefore, have a lot of do's and don'ts, or have a lot of assessments, monitoring procedures, compared to the natural birth movement and the home birth movement that believes that these three words mean it's just a piece of cake. Women instinctively know how to do it, and that it's a no-brainer, and we should just go into it just trusting birth and trusting that everything's going to be fine and that we're going to manage well and that this is going to be a highlight experience. It is much more challenging to fill in the gaps around that interpretation than it is to fill in the gaps around the interpretation that anything that might happen could happen, because that interpretation leaves a huge space to fill in the gaps by women and men becoming skilled. Believing there's just instinctive means that people aren't interested in skills because cows and cats aren't taught and humans are animals, and therefore we don't need to be taught. We should just know how. And this is what we've been up against for the past 40 of the 50 years, is that the idea, the words, and the actions that has led to today have been filled with issues around garbage in and garbage out. So what I hope you get from this video is to fill the gaps. Don't see these things as failures. Just fill the gaps, even if it's just for your birth.